Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Corey Thornton. I'm the Managing Editor for Market Intelligence at Open Minds. Today, as part of our weekly Executive Web Forum series, Open Minds Executive Vice President Rob Hickernell will walk you through how to ensure your website is compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act. Before we get started, we have a couple of important housekeeping reminders. While your audio will be muted during today's briefing, we will have this as an interactive session. Rob will be asking you questions throughout the presentation. Listen for his questions and be ready to participate using the chat feature in GoToWebinar. If you have a question at any time during the presentation, please enter your question in the chat. We will be sure to address it. Thank you in advance, and for your participation, let's keep this interactive. The slides and recording for today's briefing will be available on the Open Minds website starting next Monday. And with that, Rob Hickernell.
Thank you, Corey, and thank you everybody for coming and attending today's Open Minds webinar. Today we're going to be talking about your virtual front door, your website, how important that it is that you make it accessible to everyone, regardless of how they may access the internet, as well as people with disabilities, to make sure that people with vision issues, hearing problems, or other sort of disabilities that we'll go through can successfully interact and engage with your website. And as part of that, we'll go over some of the Americans with Disabilities Act and how that applies into this. So let's go ahead and get kicked off. Our agenda today, I'm going to give a little background on going virtual and why it's so important to pay attention to access to your website. I'll define the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and then what does it have to do with my website. And then we'll go into some best practices, a blueprint for design, some things to keep aware of. This is not meant to be a technical presentation, but there are some technical aspects that you'll want to go over with your web developers and your designers to make sure that your website is accessible for all that want to come into that virtual front door. And then we'll pose some key questions as a management and executive team that you need to ask of your internal teams. And so we'll go over that and look at some of the accessibility tools that are out there, and then we'll close with a Q&A session. Before I get started, I am going to, as Corey mentioned, stop a few times along the way, ask the audience some questions. And so when I do that, if you could type them into your chat box, we'll kind of get some real-time answers to some of the questions and see what's happening out there with the audience as it relates to your websites and the accessibility of those websites. So really, I wanted to just set the table here and understanding why, going virtual in 2021, a successful business strategy starts really with going virtual. And so the main impetus of all of this is that the internet is massive. It continues a year-over-year growth. Everybody is online, whether you're talking about desktop users, mobile phone users, tablet users. It's growing year over year, continues to grow year over year. Most of the adults on the internet are using mobile phones to access the internet. So that actually brings up a very interesting point and perspective of mobile versus desktop as far as website accessibility and how easy it is it for people with a vision problem, for example, to see your mobile website, which has a smaller screen than a traditional computer does. So the growth of mobile has fueled some more attention on the ADA and the website accessibility of your site. Social media continues to grow, so there's comments. So if you've got a website that somebody's having trouble accessing because they have a mobility problem and they can't use a mouse very well, you could end up with some negative comments on social media. So all of these factors are really kind of playing into the notion that paying attention to your virtual front door is extremely important. And over the last 5 years or so, healthcare has really jettisoned its way online, and so from all the way from doctors' recommendations on social media to online review sites for doctors and healthcare providers, as well as online doctor visits scheduling online, and of course in this year telemedicine has been huge, and online services to conduct appointments over the phone and on the internet and on the apps. So all of that is fueling this for our market in particular. And the digital advertising of all of these healthcare companies is just exploding. So there's a lot more money being spent out there to advertise websites, to advertise these digital apps on phones and tablets. So that's been increasing year over year, and it's projected to only continue in that growth. So what's fueling this revolution in healthcare coming online? Number one is probably reform and healthcare policy changes, just making it more and more easy to sign up for services online. But another equally important factor here is demographics. And so every year that goes by over the last 5 years, let's just say, unfortunately, you have an older population that is aging out, and you've got the most important factor here is you've got a younger, digitally native demographic that is now making healthcare decisions for their young families. And they grew up with accessing everything over the internet and having immediate satisfaction to their inquiries or getting a schedule, or they're used to these decisions. So it makes it so important to be focusing on your virtual presence as well as your physical presence as well. More transparency of different policies and fees online, technology advancements, lots of new apps coming out. All of this is really fueling a lot of this online revolution in healthcare. And of course, this past year, COVID-19 has really just emphasized and actually sped it up. And now I don't think that there's any argument that we're going to be, working from our homes more. We're going to be having virtual doctor's appointments more. And so as this demographic change happens also with younger people that are used to all of these digital services, it just becomes more and more important. And because the internet is so big, you've also got a lot of people, very large populations of people with different types of disabilities. And so your website design and functionality really needs to take into consideration people with different disabilities, different types of disabilities. So here, there's statistics out here that over half of Americans are living with some sort of disability, right? They might not be handicapped, but they have a disability where they learn a little differently. They learn a little slower. They have a slight vision problem. They don't hear as well. There are numbers out there of people that have problems grasping. Their hands might shake from a medical condition. So that's a disability that if your hands shake and you have to use a mouse, you might not be able to click where you're intending to click. And that's a usability measure that we'll look at and talk about in more detail. So there's people with cognitive, mental and emotional impairments, vision and hearing, and all of these are categories of people that want to access your website. And I'm going to hopefully show you ways to make sure that those people can access your website and become customers for you as well. So I wanted to pause here really quickly just to ask the audience, imagine if, having a similar disability as those listed here, how would you feel? How would you feel if you accessed the website that you just couldn't access? It just didn't work for you. And a lot of websites are out there that are like this. So I just want to get kind of a feel. You can put into the chat box. I'll give a couple of minutes for you to put in your responses, and we can see what people are feeling out there. Okay, I see someone saying they would feel frustrated. Yes, and annoyed, and these are all real feelings that people have. Um, real feelings that people have when they access something that they can't get to. And in particular, if you've got a disability, you're expecting that you're not being discriminated against, and you're expecting that every product and service is available to you, just like people without a disability. And so when you get upon a website that you can't use because one of various different reasons, or it doesn't work for you, is a better way to say it, it has an impact. Another person wrote back, the company lacks empathy. And so that's, they're not taking people's feelings and issues into consideration. So it's kind of limiting. So those are all very real, valid feelings that people have with disabilities when they would enter into your website, and they can't access it for one reason or another. And we'll get into what some of those reasons are, and then how you can overcome those. So I haven't mentioned really a lot about the ADA yet. What is the Americans with Disabilities Act, and what does it have to do with my website? So think about it this way. If in the physical world, a lot of you with physical locations probably have a handicapped ramp to get into your front door, a wheelchair ramp, something to make it easy for not just people with a wheelchair, but might have a knee problem, right? And they don't want to go up steps, and it's easier for them to walk up a ramp. So you need to make sure that your virtual front door, which is your website, allows people in, just like in the physical world. Your in-person traffic. So that's really what this is all about. That's what this is all about. And the Americans with Disabilities Act has been around for a while, since 1990, and that makes it predates really the modern internet, at least. And it's a civil rights law. And there's a lot of, I'm not going to get into much of the legalities around any of this, but there is a lot of law associated with this. And so I'm going to put a couple of disclaimers out here. This is that you should consult with a lawyer or a legal expert into the applicability of this act. There are different business classes that are and are not subject to the ADA. But really the purpose of this is to make sure that all areas of public life and public places are open to everybody, including people that have disabilities, and make sure that they have the same rights as everyone else. So that is what the Americans with Disabilities Act is. The relation to the website, when this was passed in 1990, it started out with some telecommunication services that were required. So for telephones and for television and cable services were required to put different things in for people with disabilities, is mostly on vision and hearing issues over telecommunications networks. But over time, as the internet has evolved, this is now much more prevalent to websites. So in 2010, there was passed the Americans with Disabilities Act Standards for Accessible Design, which governs all of the electronic and information technology. And in our world for today, it's websites. And so that's what governs a lot of the accessibility standards for websites and website design. So again, there's a lot of law around this, and a lot of regulation. So I would encourage you to check that out and to consult a legal expert on what your obligations are. But what I'm really going to talk about today is, this is not about being legally, check the box. This is about making sure that your website is accessible for everyone, and you don't have to turn somebody away, and somebody doesn't come out with some negative comments that you're not compatible with a screen reader, and we'll get into what that is in a few minutes here. So what's an ADA compliant website? Really, it gets down to navigation, website navigation, access to files and formats, the ability to view and read content on your website. All of these things need to be taken care of for people with disabilities. So navigation is much more physical, is how they move around on your website, how they click on links, how they move, how you can code your website so people could use your website without a mouse to move around, labeling things, having audio files that would read things out as opposed to you were able to see something when you're hovering. So given that, I wanted to take another brief moment here. Given that understanding of navigation, file formats, access, audio, visual, how many people, and you can just say yes, no, I don't know, on the call have thought of a plan that they need to implement, already have a plan that they're implementing. How would that, how many people have something like that in place or are already thinking of having something in place? You could just enter yes or no, or not yet, something like that into the chat box, and we'll see how we pan out here. So I've got one person saying not yet. So hopefully today that'll help you. These will help you think about these things and give you some things to take back to your executive team to talk about. Another person not yet. So good. I'm glad you're in the right place to get the information. Need to get on this. Okay, good. Yes. I think this is important, and it's a good way to kick off 2021. And it's the right thing to do to make sure everybody has equal access and can see all of your great content and interact with you and become your customer and schedule online visits and things like that. So thank you for your input there. Okay. So now I'm going to get into a little bit more detail here on some concepts and some things to think about. Again, I'm not getting into the technical aspects of a lot of this, but I will introduce some technical concepts. So feel free to ask the question of what is that, and I can help explain the best I can. So along with this 2010 standard that the government passed, an internet consortium of design, internet companies, and came up with a best practice for web content accessibility guidelines. Okay, and this is really the heart of what we're going to talk about today. That this is the guts. There's a lot more detail behind each one of these, but if you take back and go to your teams and talk about these 4 things and make sure that your web content, your website can achieve these 4 aspects, I think you'll be in a good place. And these will bring up concepts and things to talk about. And you'll have to make some business choices of what is most important. Who are our customers? What problems might they have? And so I'm not saying that you would need to do everything in these guidelines, but you should know that they're out there and focus to make your website as accessible for everybody as possible, so that if you are subject to the ADA regulations, you would be compliant. So the first one is that your web content, your website is perceivable. So this goes to is there common sense behind how people, when they get to your website, can they, if they have a vision problem, how do they perceive that content if they have a vision problem? So are there audio alternatives? Do you offer the ability for a screen reader? And I'll go ahead and talk about a screen reader now. It's a piece of software that the user would install on their computer, or an app on their smartphone that would quote, in air quotes here, read the website text and then speak it to them through the speakers of the computer. But the website itself has to be coded in such a manner that it's telling this piece of software how to do this and how to interpret this. So there is work for web developers to do to make sure that the website is accessible to screen readers, and then is customized so that if you hover over something as somebody with a vision problem, it could read what that image is. The software is not going to know by itself what the image is, so you have to tell them in some tags, and we can go into that a little bit more detail. But is it perceivable? Can you, for somebody that has a vision problem, what that web content is? The next one is operable, and this one really gets to the navigation aspect of it. So examples would include using arrows on your keyboard instead of a mouse, so that they could easily, if they can't grip a mouse, and a lot of people have problems with gripping things, it could be, carpal tunnel, could be, a handshake that's brought on from a medical condition, lots of different medical reasons. But can you navigate through a website with somebody that doesn't have the full use of their hands on a mouse? Can somebody that doesn't have use of their fingers access? So how to, making sure that different types of keyboards, and they do make keyboard peripherals for people with these disabilities, make sure that those buttons and interactions will work with your website. So operable, make sure that it will operate for people with a physical handicap. Understandable, the content, is it easy to understand? Do you have a good process? Sometimes it's not so clear how to do things online and how to access. I want to go and schedule an online appointment. Okay, how do I do that? And if I'm somebody with a slight cognitive disability, it might be harder for me to understand that process. So making it, and this goes a lot in just the layout and the design of the page, making sure that clicks to content or clicks to engagement with a web form or something where you're wanting them to engage with you, make it as easy as possible. Reduce the number of clicks required to get to something that's important, and all the way around. Reduce the number of fields required, possibly to sign up for a membership or for registration. If the data is nice to have but not 100% necessary, consider not including it in your registration flows and asking for it later in another process. But get that person to be able to understand your content and understand your process and your flow. And then robust. Website's content, make sure it can be interpreted and accessed by all devices and platforms. So there are a lot of different devices and different platforms and different web browsers, and we'll go into some of that in a little bit. But really, it should be robust enough to be accessible to everyone on any device. Doesn't matter where they're coming from, how they're accessing your website. It should work. And so there's technical things to look at for all of that. Okay, so that's just those 4 things. This is from a high-level perspective. If you keep these 4 things in mind, I think you'll be in good shape. This is where it gets a little bit more technical. So I'm going to not go over this in a lot of detail, but feel free to ask any questions, even in the middle or at the end of the presentation. So, and I'll just explain what these things are. So these alt tags. So this is really just a way that you code the website to tell what an image is. So, a person with no issues with vision would see the image of the Golden Gate Bridge and know that that's the Golden Gate Bridge, or at least know that that's a bridge, and that would be done. You would also hover, generally speaking, over that image, and there might be a quote, a visual tag that says bridge. So if you might have trouble looking at colors or images, but you might be able to read text fine. So that could give a clue. The screen reader would also be able to read that and know and say the word bridge to you as you would hover over if you're using a screen reader. And so there's an audio version of this tag as well. So your website could speak even if the user doesn't have a screen reader installed on their computer. You could code your website so that it would speak and say that when they hover over that that's a bridge. But the website, it's not going to know that by itself. You have to tell them what that is. AI hasn't, well, it is there, but most websites and software don't have that level built in yet. Google does, and those big guys. But these are all things to make sure that you can help your customers read your content on your website. Text transcripts. There's going to be a transcript that we're going to access right after this. This service, GoToWebinar, has a feature that we're going to be able to pull out that text transcript, make that available. So you could have that available for people that have hearing issues. And so if you're running whether it's a help video, it could be a webinar like this. You could allow somebody that can't hear what I'm saying to read what I'm saying by having that text transcript available to them and accessible for them to download and read at their leisure. Header code, not going to go into a whole lot of this, going into a little bit more detail, but again, for screen readers to make sure it knows what web page it's on. So a website might have, let's say 50 web pages. And so as you navigate, when you have no issues with vision, it's relatively easy to kind of understand your path and how you got there. But if you have a vision problem, you may get lost in those pages of the website. So you want to be able to make sure that the header code of that page can describe what page that user is on. Suggestions in input errors. This is big in forms. So you might get somebody to register for your service or sign up for an online appointment or enter in insurance information or whatever it might be. If there are errors, and this is a good usability perspective, even for people without any disability at all, is to give input errors, input or suggestions. Password is a big one. Like there's password strength, right? And you're creating a password on a website. If they fail because it's too weak, you should tell them, why is it too weak? What can I do to improve the strength of this so that this website accepts it? So this is just helping the person navigate and understand how to use your website. And then consistent layout, organized layout, the menus, the links, the buttons, organize them in a way that it makes intuitive sense for a flow. One thing I'll say on links is that, and on buttons, is that sometimes the website code might not include the exact pixels that are necessary to have a clickable area. So you could find that you click on something and you think that it should be taking you to another page, and it does nothing. And you think, oh, is my computer broken? Oh, what's wrong? A lot of cases, it's because the website, where you clicked on the page, the website doesn't have an instruction to tell the computer to go to another web page. And so that becomes a problem for people with visual problems. They can't see exactly where they're clicking. They know in the general area they're clicking in the right area to go somewhere. If they're not blind and they know, they can see some things, but they don't see very well. It's blurry. They have tunnel vision problems, what have you. You need to make sure that your pixels for your links are such that if you click, if a reasonable person would click on an area, that takes them to their intended place and they don't think that there's a problem. So I've had that problem myself on websites that I've gone to, and thinking that there was a problem, and it really wasn't. It wasn't my problem. It was just that the website didn't have the pixels in the right place. This is another disclaimer, really. These are complex. The ADA and compliance issues and accessibility issues are complex. So if you do have questions after this presentation, I do encourage to consult an attorney with expertise in ADA compliance, as well as consult your web developer, the company that hosts your website, if you don't do it yourself, and just kind of ask them, how can we become more compliant? But there are fees, possible lawsuits for people that would be required to follow the ADA if you're not compliant, if you had a complaint. So that's why I just wanted to state again that you should look into, is your business required to follow the ADA? And if they are, then you would need to understand what risk you're at and then what cost might be associated with becoming compliant, so you can understand that going in. So just wanted to put that out there. So a couple of best practices here. Based on what I've said, really, you're going to want to really structure your website so that screen readers can recognize all of the different areas of your website and translate it for people. So those screen readers are, again, they're software that the user installs on their phone or on their computer, and it reads the content out to them. There are a lot of them out in the market that people use, and a lot of different quality levels of screen readers out there. But your website would need to be compliant with some of these top screen readers to make sure that it will read and work with those screen readers for it to be accessible for people with vision problems. Ensure that your site allows for navigation without a mouse. This is really using keyboard navigation, up, down, arrows, and tab button to make sure that you can navigate around with that. Highlight content when navigating. So this would be for people with vision problems, and could be also for people with hearing problems as they navigate through. You would want to highlight that content when they're navigating through. Ensure that your site works across all browsers and devices. There are a lot of devices and browsers out there. A lot of browsers, particularly for older folks, they might have an old browser that that they're using still on their computer, and it could be that some browsers are not supported any longer by the browser company. So Microsoft stopped Internet Explorer, I think, at 10 a year ago. So most websites don't test for that, but you might still have people that are accessing your website on old browsers and different types of devices. So you should know, you can get the analytics through Google Analytics or other analytics packages, but your web team should be able to tell you what browsers are accessing your website, what devices are accessing your website. You could look at percentages and then make a business decision of okay, we're going to support 90% of our traffic, and then you might want to update your customer service team or somebody who's handling inquiries from customers about the other 10% and what happens to those people, and what they see and how they could what the recommendation would be. But you would need to look into that in order to determine what that level would be for your website. Obviously, access and navigable for all people, 8 to 80. You're probably not going to have anybody 8 years old accessing, our field, but you certainly probably are going to have people 80 years old accessing. So really, soup to nuts, everybody should be able to access your website in the same way. A word of caution: be careful about one-click solutions. There are, you're going to go back to your offices, you're going to search Google for website accessibility solutions, or website ADA compliance solutions or software. And there's going to be, you're going to go into Google and you're going to search for this, and you're going to find a lot of people advertising for this software. And they're going to show up in the first probably 4 or 5 links are all going to be ads. Be very careful with those. They may not actually fix your website. They may offer some things that are going to mask the issue and make it seem like it's good, but it may not be, and you might actually have to pay for that software. So I do some research. I talk about 2 tools in a moment that are good, but there are things out there, and the fact that people advertise on Google means that people make a lot of money from these solutions. So there's not always the best actors out there, as most of you guys probably know. So be careful about one-click solutions. The standard is Lighthouse by Google. So Google bought this a number of years ago, and it audits your website for various things, lots of things, including ADA compliance and accessibility. I'll show you a screenshot from that in a moment. And then just real quick, before I ask my next question, Open Minds recently, we did a little upgrade on our compatibility here, and we used Lighthouse by Google to evaluate us. And so if you'll notice on the lower left of this screenshot of our homepage is this little person. That's the icon for accessibility options. So when you click on that, now we give users the ability to toggle different functions of our website based on their needs. So now all of a sudden, our website is customizable for people with vision problems. So we or motion, problems with keyboard navigation. So contrast is huge. Like you want to be able to, like, different websites use different colors and different contrasts. We can customize our website. The text size, you can customize that. All of these things are things that we're allowing, our code and our website is allowing users to customize for what is best for them. And so different websites, would have these. You can also, there are other programs you can do that'll do your whole computer, but this, as you're responsible for your website, this gives your users the confidence that they can access and customize based on what looks best and what works best for them. So I wanted to pause again and ask, what do you think the main areas, given all the things that we've talked about so far or thus far, what do you think the main areas are for your website that you need to go back and talk to your web development team or your marketing team or your product management team, whoever is kind of managing your website? What are those features that you think might, you might need to improve and factor? So take a moment to put something into the chat box there, and I'll answer that. I'll take a look at the answers coming in. Yeah, navigation. It's got to be clear, straightforward, easy to understand. And again, this is something that will help every user of your website, is to have clear and understandable navigation. Does it make sense? When I go from one place to the next place, when I click on something, does it make sense of where I land? All of that. See a couple of good comments here. Never thought about the number of clicks before. Yeah. And again, that's another thing that's going to pay lots of dividends because it's every user. Nobody wants to have to click 5 times to get to something that they really want to see. Now, there could be business reasons why you want them to click 5 times. But from a user perspective and a usability perspective and a user experience, it's always best to get people where they want to go as quickly as possible. And of course, with people with disabilities, I think it's even more important. Too many click-throughs, that one is seconded there. So yeah, some good things to take back to your teams to be able to focus and get a couple of these things there could be some quick wins possibly, depending on how your website is developed. All right, some questions to ask yourself and your management team now. So I'm going to leave the technical and much more into the leadership and the business aspect here. Do we have C-level buy-in and the right team to do this? So the commitment for accessibility and compliance with American with Disabilities Act definitely needs to start at the top. And like I said before, it does go beyond complying with the law. This is not what this is about, in my opinion. Of course, I'm not a lawyer, but I think this is about ensuring that all people can access your website regardless of anything. And that's the right thing to do for the business. You wouldn't want to turn away a possible customer because they couldn't read the content that you had, and their screen reader didn't work with your website. So business perspective, there's a big plus for ensuring all of this just at that perspective. So the demographic numbers in most sectors and most websites aren't really focusing on this, but people with disabilities do deserve to access and read anything on the internet, just like they deserve to be able to go into any store in the physical world. The right team to implement. If you have it, people with a family member or a close friend that has some sort of disability and has had trouble, with websites, and so getting that empathy is in that area. That's going to be key to driving a really good accessibility strategy for your website. Another one that we get asked a lot, who will own the ADA, who should own the ADA compliance function? So depending on how you're structured and what type of services you have in-house versus outsourced or whatever, definitely sits probably with a legal and/or an operations team or group. But it definitely would pull in marketing, product management, web development. All of those teams would need to come together to have the best solution. So ownership, yeah, legal or operations. But I think the team that decides on these things there should be a component of all of those other functions as well. And then of course, it's going to be up to the web developers to develop the solution. So they're going to be key in that as well. KPIs. Do we have KPIs, key performance indicators? And do we have a system in place for tracking, monitoring, and reporting? So that's obviously, you guys know, vital. KPIs are how you run your business, how do you manage your business. So for website accessibility, there are tools out there for index scoring for how well your website is doing for accessibility. And these are one tool is from Google. There's lots of others out there, but they basically will, it's almost like Google is indexing your website for search results. They'll scan and look at it, and they'll be able to see the back end and see how somebody with a disability could interact, and then they'll give you kind of a score. And so those things can be monitored, monthly, quarterly, yearly, however you want to manage that. Various checklists that are out there on best practices, just to make sure that you're adhering to all of the best practices, and so that could be something like you set up as a yellow, green, red kind of a measurement system to say, yeah, we're doing this. Oh, this broke, so it's red, and this is in yellow because it's in development right now. Different things so that you can keep track of the features of how you're doing. And then, I made a comment earlier about social media and comments. People leaving comments, you should be working with your customer support teams and your social media teams to make sure that any comments that you're getting about accessibility, questions about it, complaints, are funneled back into your team so that they could see that and then act on it to help improve that access for that person with a vision problem or a hearing problem or what have you. And so then, of course, you guys all know you've got to, you got to inspect what you expect. So take a look at, manage those numbers, at least on a quarterly basis to make sure you're on the right track. And then how will we measure and define success? Again, I've said it before, I'll say it again. It's not about, to me, it's not about ensuring you don't run afoul of the law, but it's about access, equal access. And knowing that everybody can come to your website and be able to understand, read your content, interact with your services, and sign up for, a registration or get an appointment online. Knowing that should make everyone feel good to know that you've got that. So that's a big level of success. Okay. Just real briefly before I head into my last question for the group, accessibility tools. So just a couple of just basic screen grabs of just some basic stuff here. On the left, Lighthouse. This is a Google development web dev tool, but you can see here that they have these performance measures for your website performance. So like how fast is your website? Accessibility, so that's going to be all of the things that we talked about. SEO, so search engine optimization, like how well does your website do for search engine optimization? And then it will give you little indicators when you click on each one. Now, this screenshot is just showing the performance here. But if this were not 100% in accessibility, down at the bottom here, you would get these little areas of improvement, things that your web dev team should look at for improvement. And so that this can give some signals and signs to those teams to go fix things. And then accessibility, very, very, very similar. A lot of websites actually, as I was doing some research for this, a lot of websites are using accessibility as their software tool and allowing those accessibility adjustments on websites. And so those are some things there, and some things we didn't talk about, like epilepsy safe profile. We talked a lot about visually impaired. We mentioned a little bit about cognitive disability, ADHD friendly profile. So all of these things can be set up to make sure that all of the features and content on your website are going to be hitting best practices for all of these different groups of people. So I had a couple of questions that came in, but I did want to, before I get actually to that set of questions, I wanted to just pause and see if anybody had any questions. I'll open the my chat box up here. If anybody has any questions on anything here, before I read some that came in before we went live, I'm happy to answer any questions. If not, I'll start to read through here on the ones that came in early, and then I'll go back to my screen to see if anybody has thought of anything. So one question that came in earlier, we were able to get some answers prior to the webinar here. Does Google look at website accessibility and ADA compliance when ranking a website for search? Which is a great question, because I've talked a lot about Google and some tools that they have. They do not specifically look at ADA compliance for ranking. So ADA compliance is really a legal thing, and Google's not getting in the middle of it. However, one of Google's for search results and ranking, and does your website rank as high as it could for a given search query that Google gets. Usability of your website, user experience of your website are two of the most important factors that Google now has for ranking websites. They want to give their traffic, it's their customer that's coming to Google. looking for something, right? So they want to give their customer the best user experience possible. So having really great website accessibility will help your SEO rankings. It's not a specific factor. And ADA compliance certainly is not a specific factor, but it's always a good practice to have all of this stuff done for a user experience, okay? Another one we had come in, how many ADA complaints and lawsuits are there out there recently? So we found 11,000 lawsuits in 2019 from this law firm, Seyfarth and Shaw. That they said was an 8.8% increase over 2018. So we'll have to get the numbers for 2020, see what that looks like, but that's a lot of lawsuits over this. So again, it shows the where there is a legal obligation. If there's a legal obligation, you need to make sure that you're fulfilling that, or you remain liable there. And then the other one that came in before we went live, what are the most common website accessibility issues? So low contrast on text. So contrast is huge. People see things different ways, and some like a light, some like a dark. That's probably the number one. Missing alt text on images. We talked a little bit about the alt text earlier. If you remember, that is where when you hover over an image, you can see what the image is. You can see the words of what the image is. So if it was a bridge, it would say bridge, for example, if that was the alt text tag that you used. And then you could have it read it out there also. Missing text link. This again would be hovering over a URL, a link that has a long, incomprehensible web address. That text link, you could insert, very clear words of what that will lead to. And so when the user hovers over, they don't have to just like read in that incomprehensible URL string. They can actually see, okay, yeah, that makes sense. I'm going to go to this page. Too many navigation links makes it hard and confusing. Empty form labels. So this is having a form that might be required field, but not telling somebody what is the label, what's the label of that field was required. Unclear form controls. So those are all of the most common accessibility issues that have been kind of found out in the web on our research. So were there any, I just wanted to ask if there was any other questions before I ask my last question of the team. So I'll just give a minute, see if any other questions come in through the chat box. So I'm not seeing any more, but I do want to ask, with everything that we've talked about today, do you think this gives you a good set of topics to address, to talk about back, with your tech teams or your legal team or your marketing team? And what do you think you might, what would be your top thing that you want to go and take back to your management team based on today? So just type in anything into the chat room, the chat box, sorry. Font size, long pages. Oh shoot, I missed a couple of questions here. I apologize. How long does making your site right take, or should it take? I hate to give the answer of it depends, but it really does. I would start by kind of doing an audit of some of these. You could use some of these tools. Google Lighthouse would be a good one to start with, to run an audit to see what is out there, and then it'll tell your web development team, it'll point them in some directions, and they could give you an estimate of how long some of those things would take to fix. So, you know, a lot of these things can probably be done relatively quickly. You know, putting tags in, depending on how many web pages your website has, that's a factor. How much custom hard-coded code is in your website. So is it, there's a lot of factors that it could take longer. But a lot of this should be relatively, if your website is built on a modern, you know, last 2 to 3 years code base, I think a lot of this stuff is probably a relatively short, you know, month. You know, within a month you could have these things live on your website, I would say in general. How often should you reassess the site? You do have to give some time in between after you make some changes or you take a look to make sure that you give enough time for enough metrics to come in where it is statistically a valid assessment. So, you know, depending on how much traffic you get on a normal basis, that might extend out the time that you it would take to collect that data. So again, I think sometimes it depends, but that is one factor to look at. So I'd say, you know, anywhere between, you know, 2 to 6 months of data. Again, depending on how large your website is. Larger websites, you could, you know, a week, you know, you could run a test and see what's happening after a week. Okay, so some of the responses coming back now from my other question. Making a priority, so making this a priority is what they're going to take back. Planning an audit to see where we are at, so that's good. So that is really the first step, is to plan an audit, see where you are, and go from there. So good. So thank you very much for all of that input. That was very, very helpful for us. That is everything that I had, unless there are more questions. I want to thank you as we're approaching our time today. And I want to hand it back over to Corey for a few last words.
Thanks, Rob. That was great today. I want to thank everybody for joining us. And I want to remind everybody that the slides and the recording for this will be available next Monday. And please join us again next Thursday, January 14th at 1 p.m. Eastern, when Open Minds Senior or Vice President Richard Lewis will present how to build a payer pitch deck. You can sign up for that at www.openminds.com. Look for it under the events tab for webinars. And with that, again, thank you, Rob. Thank you, everybody. And we'll see you next week.
Thank you.